The words of the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou prepare a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. From the words of the book of Job, there is no replacing a person of wisdom. There are mines for silver in places where gold is refined. Iron is taken from the earth, and copper is smelted from the rock. But where can wisdom be found, and where is the source of understanding? There is no replacing a person of wisdom. Come together this morning to celebrate the life of Mike Zegers, dear husband to Melissa, son to Marianne and Ted, brother to Ted and Jerry, and dear father to Zoe and Neil, and to Max. Rabbi Jeremy Wiederhorn was Mike's family rabbi. You may know that Mike actually was not of the Jewish faith, but he was a very supportive member of our Jewish community. Melissa, of course, is a member of our community together with her children, Zoe and Max, who became bat mitzvah and bar mitzvah with us. And even though Mike never officially became a member of the Jewish community, he was always loyal and supportive, and always sat together with Melissa. She commented that that was something that she truly appreciated, that she knew that Mike always knew that it was something that was important to her, so therefore it became important to him. And Judaism is in many ways a realistic faith, and we don't vainly pretend that death is not real, but neither do we accept death as the end of all personal association. Our tradition teaches us that we are all part of a timeless enterprise, and that memory is the link that binds the generations into one continuous chain of life. And so for centuries, whenever we would lose loved ones in our community, we would add the phrase to their name, Zichrono Livracha, may his memory be a blessing. And to recall our loved ones in this way gives us strength during times of weakness, and courage in moments of grief, and meaning in periods of aimlessness. And the poet echoed this traditional Jewish sentiment when he wrote, "Let not our thoughts be tears. Tears are for things that pass. Well may we weep for snow-fallen grass, for blue eyes fallen, for words that go, for roses drooping low. Like waning sound of laughter to an end, well may you weep for these, my friend. But for this man, whose heart was hope that dies not, whose soul was love that lies not, whose life was truth that flies not, for him we dare not weep. Let him come with us laughing, where new winds blow. Tears are seeming only for things that go." So our tradition teaches us that when an individual passes on, he is in truth not dead. He lives on in the hearts and in the souls of those whose lives he has touched. So the loss of Mike leaves all of us deeply, deeply sad. We all miss him very much. But we are grateful for the wonderful memory that he leaves behind. A good, enthusiastic, fiercely loyal, committed, dedicated, detail-oriented, kind human being. And we say, Zichrono Livracha, may his memory forever be a source of blessing to us and to everyone with whom he came into contact. Today we're going to hear from a few of those people who knew him well. You probably could hear from dozens and dozens of you today. But we're going to begin now with Mike's older brother, Ted, and we ask Ted to please come forward.
I first met Mike when he was a day or two old, when our mother brought him home from the hospital and was proudly showing him off to Jerry and I. And of course, Jerry and I are far too young to remember this, but apparently we took one look at him, said, "Oh, another one," and resumed playing whatever game it was that we were playing at the time. We soon discovered that he was a great person to play with, because one thing about Mike was all his life he just loved games, whether it was card games, board games, dice games, mahjong later in life, playing outside. Didn't really matter, he liked it, and he tended to be good at it. If it was a strategy game, he figured out how it worked. If it was a board game with dice, he seemed to have a knack for coming up with the right roll. One game in particular that I want to note is a game called Bora, which was sort of our family card game that we first learned in the summer of '73, which was the first time Mike visited Holland, where their parents were originally from. And we played that game, and for years after, we would try to figure out some of the history of it, because Mike, Jerry, and I all assumed it was some traditional Dutch game, and we would search on the internet and try to find things with no real success. And our mom eventually told us that it was something one of her uncles had made up, and that it didn't really have any history. I did a few years ago discover a game that was shared a lot of elements with it and was related to it. And as a lifelong Ohio State fan, I'm sure Mike was disappointed that it had the unfortunate name of Michigan. That same summer, Mike's relationship with dogs took a little turn. He was bitten by Lucy, a dog that was our Uncle Yas's dog, and he was scarred for life, quite literally, on that last sad yet wonderful day. Sorry. He showed us the scar that he still had. Anyway, about a year later, we got a dog named Susie that was a dog that we had for the rest of our childhood. And when she was a puppy, she was a little wild. She was a very active German Shepherd. One evening, Mom and Dad went out for dinner or a movie or something, and left us alone with Susie. And we were trying to watch TV, and Susie was chasing us and nipping around as she did, because she was a few months old. But like the engineer he eventually became, Mike solved that problem. He climbed up on the dining room table and watched TV there, where our parents later found him sound asleep with Susie curled up on the floor next to the table, and Jerry and I had just got off the bed and left Mike there. But he later found ways to get his revenge on the troublesome canine community. We had a Doberman Pinscher next door that liked to bark at us and stick its face through a chain link fence. One day Mike found some green paint and painted the dog's nose green. And a little later, the dog's owners next door came knocking to confirm with our parents that it was non-toxic paint, which apparently it was. And later, he tried to get his revenge on troublesome dogs by shipping beloved Molly off to our parents in Colorado. Molly got the last laugh there because she loved Colorado probably as much as Mike did. And still, when Mike and Melissa and Max and Zoe would visit, she would kind of abandon our parents for a couple of days and spend most of her time with them. And then soon after we got Susie, we moved out to a house in the suburbs in Columbus, Ohio, which was the first time we lived near some woods. And there was a stream back there. And there was one day when there'd been a torrential downpour, and we decided to walk down the stream. It connected a little bit, sort of down the end of the street to a larger stream called Slate Run, which was so named because it had a very flat slate stream bed. And we discovered that the current then with the downpour was strong enough, and we were still small enough, that we could just lie down on our backs and let the current sweep us down the stream for quite a long distance, eventually dumping us out into a pond that was connected to the Scioto River. And since the water was storm overflow and that pond was linked to a not super safe river, when we did come home soaking wet and told our mom what an adventure we just had, she was not too happy about it. But it was the woods that Mike loved, and the year after that we moved to Weston, and Mike spent a lot of time in the woods there, swimming in some lake, fishing in a lot of the ponds and streams, hiking in Devil's Den. And I think it was those years in the woods in Weston that probably helped later lead him to join the town's conservation commission when he moved back to Weston as an adult, and that led to some of his years of service to the community, some of which you will hear from the fire and EMS folks shortly. And since his passing, I've found that he's been in my dreams either more than he used to be, or that it just stands out a little more when he is there. And excuse me. And yes, he does live on in our dreams and memories, and he always will.
Thank you, Ted. I'm sure Mike was pleased with the results of the Ohio State game yesterday, and probably he was pleased with the Michigan State results as well. I know that in college, Mike connected with many college friends, and that he has stayed friends with for over 30 years. And one of the ways he stayed connected with them was through fantasy football. And each year they would get together for the fantasy draft, whether it be in Iceland or Jackson Hole or Vegas. But Mike was instrumental in making sure that they continued to meet and continue to enjoy each other's company this way. One of his friends was Ravi Singh, and we're going to invite Ravi now to come forward, one of Mike's lifelong college friends from Columbia.
Thank you, Rabbi. Being asked to speak about someone as beloved as Mike Zegers is a real honor, but also frankly incredibly overwhelming. I mean, after all, where do we even start? Should we start with tales about his character? Or even amongst a friendly, nice group of folks like all of us, we probably couldn't get complete agreement on any single subject. Yet we can all agree that Mike had the highest and purest character of anyone we know. And we could each go on for a long time with tales about just that one aspect of about him alone. Perhaps we can talk about his intelligence, or his grace, his wit, his incredible humility. How about his deep love for Zoe and Max, for Melissa, his family, for all of us, and his community. We will hear later from members of the Weston Fire and EMS departments. Most of us knew, of course, of Mike and Melissa's involvement in EMS and in the Weston community, and we knew how important it was to Mike. Mike would send our gang a picture of the occasional practice burning of a car or a house. I hope he was allowed to do that. The two of us would joke about it sometimes. He knew I had some pyromaniac tendencies from my early college days. I actually owe Rob Daniel a lifelong debt for saving my hide after one such incident. But anyway, in typical Mike fashion, his commitment, in this case to his community, ran very deep. Yet his humility kept most of us from knowing the full impact he made here. I really look forward to hearing from Firefighter Cohen and Chief Schlechter today. In many ways, that sums up Mike. He made such a profound impact on so many people. So on one hand, we are never surprised to come across someone else who was touched by him or cared for him deeply. Yet almost always we learned about those other spectrums of his life third hand, because he always made every minute he spent with you about you and about just being with you. Later I'll touch on some interesting anecdotes about Mike. But as our good friend Rob said earlier this week, when several of us were sharing thoughts about today, just anecdotes about their shared road trips could take up a whole speech, and I'm sure we could all spend all day today sharing our funny and meaningful anecdotes that each of us have with Mike. Luckily, I suppose, in terms of narrowing the selection of what stories to talk about today, a good chunk of the very best stories, certainly the ones that our college group shared with Mike, can't really be shared here. There might still be some statute of limitation issues somewhere, especially in the Vatican from our post-college trip to Europe. Thankfully, there were no camera phones for most of our youthful prime. Zoe, Max, you know you have a small village on standby, not just always support you and love you, but to help pass along the oral history only of some of your father's zany adventures. This worn out card has been in my wallet, transferred over the years through about a dozen wallets for over 27 years, since 1994, the day of my mother's funeral. Next to the guest book, there were a stack of these cards with this poem by Ralph Waldo Emerson. The words were so perfectly fitting for my mom. I've kept this card in my wallet all of these years, partly in memory for her, but mostly for what these words actually mean. Simply and beautifully written, the words are inspirational, in fact aspirational. I know I am still working hard in my life to live up to these words, but I know you will all agree with me that these words do truly represent Mike. From Emerson: to laugh often and much, to win the respect of intelligent people and the affection of children, to earn the appreciation of honest critics, to appreciate beauty, to find the best in others, to leave the world a bit better, whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, or a redeemed social condition. To know that one life has breathed easier because you lived here. This is to have succeeded. Let's think about those words again. This short poem basically speaks about laughing and being happy, winning respect and affection. It speaks to intelligence. It's about appreciating beauty and seeing the best in people. And most importantly, it's about just leaving the world a much better place and making life better for others. Well, Mike was happy, and he made those around him happy. He laughed, and he made us laugh. Now, to be clear, while often we were laughing with him, there were most definitely those times where we may have been laughing at him, or at least holding our breath for him. He was certainly intelligent, possibly the smartest and most clever person I ever met. And I only say possibly because, again, in typical Mike fashion, his understated manner made it hard to sometimes get a full picture of the depth of his many talents. He would never try to dominate you with his smarts, but just engage you in interesting conversations or challenge you in trivia or your powers of observation. He simultaneously had the curiosity of a child and a Nobel Prize-winning scientist. And in many ways, he was both. We all probably have our favorite stories about Mike. The one that always stands out for me happened when many of us from college were together in Iceland for a fantasy football draft. So let me first take a step back and acknowledge our almost 35-year-old fantasy football league. Sure seems like everyone plays that now, and there are dozens of hours of sports programming dedicated strictly to fantasy football. But back then, we were just a bunch of kids sitting around, making up these rules. And while not being perhaps the inventors of fantasy football, although we like to think we certainly were amongst its very early pioneers. We were lucky to have a great brotherhood in our league, and as it has expanded from its original smaller group to its group of 10 that is today. When a bunch of 19 and 20-year-olds sat around in 1987 and put our league together, one of the guys actually said, "Who knows, 25 years, this might be the only reason some of us are still talking." The ebbs and flows of life do take us all in different directions at times, and it's easy to lose touch, even with great friends. So in many ways, that comment was really prescient. But that never really applied to Mike. For Mike, as evidenced by this wide range of entangled friendships that are here today, always stayed in touch with everybody, was always on great terms with everybody, never had silly falling outs, or just drifted away. Mike, in many ways, was our rock as well. For Mark McCann, Rob Daniel, Doug Wolf, and myself, as the remaining members of that original group of young guys that actually did scoring by hand, using the sports section of the New York Times as our official scoring record, we're going to miss Mike in a really special way. But we're really heartened by the fact that Mike transitioned his team to Max this past year. So now poor Max is stuck on these ridiculous text threads of nonsense banter and is probably still confused by our somewhat archaic rules and archaic technology. Sorry, buddy. But Max, it means so much to the four of us and the rest of the guys in the league, Dave, Mike, Tom, Jimmy, and Rich, that you're part of this experience that meant so much to your dad. Thank you for your patience with us old geezers. But remember, in the spirit of your dad's brilliance and his quiet, very fierce competitiveness, we are especially looking forward to kicking your ass. Back to Iceland. It's my favorite story in part because of this special group of people who are all there together to witness it. Brotherhood was a big part of what Mike was all about. But also in part because this particular incident perfectly summed up Mike in that genuine intellectual curiosity meets the mischievous child that you can't take your eyes off of for even a second. And also because it was another example of laughing with him and at him at the same time. Now outside the US, as many of you know, they assume that you're just going to follow instructions, use your common sense, and don't do dumb and dangerous things. So that gentlemen like these folks don't have to rescue out of trees, or your kid doesn't get stuck between the bars of some silly gate. Americans are uniquely qualified at doing those things. So in Europe, you can practically walk right up to the statues in Rome. They're thousands of years old, and, well, let's say give them a big hug. Or perhaps go and sit on the Pope's empty chair right after the Wednesday Mass at the Vatican because, well, the armed military police turned their backs for just a second. Now, for the record, I'm not officially saying that I have knowledge of any of these things actually happening, but rumor has it that a group of knucklehead American kids didn't follow instructions and almost got shot by the Carabinieri several times. Back to Iceland again. Here we are, at the site of one of the largest geysers in the world, much bigger than Old Faithful. A truly beautiful spot on our planet. And they let you walk practically right up to these geysers on these pools of steaming and boiling water, which are labeled, super hot, 108 degrees, in case the steam and the bubbles didn't give you a clue. We're all walking around, we're taking pictures, we all get together a little bit later. We notice that Mike is kind of being quiet, a little sheepish, his one hand tucked awkwardly behind his back. You guys know where I'm going, right? After some discussion and coaxing, we finally get him to show us his hand. He has this bright red blister, almost a second-degree burn. He had dipped his finger in the boiling pool, apparently to see if it was really 108 degrees. Some newsflash, it was. So we're not really sure what he was trying to do. Maybe he wanted to see if it was 108 degrees. Maybe he wanted to see if his skin really didn't melt at 108 degrees. I don't think we ever really figured it out, whether it was the curious and mischievous child in him or the brilliant mad scientist part of him. Either way, the scene was priceless. It was so Mike. He was the smartest guy in the room, possibly the one guy you want with you if you're stuck on a deserted island. But he might also be the first guy to get eaten alive on that island. When we first moved into this really, really crappy apartment in not such a great part of town, soon after college, we were watching that old show MacGyver, which you might remember. And we were talking about, hey, if we were stuck on a deserted island, who would we want? Now, it could have been because we're sitting right next to each other. It seemed like the right thing to say, hey, we'd want each other. Now, for me, I definitely would have wanted him. He was obviously so smart. He was also clever. Those aren't the same thing. Obviously, it was a lot of fun. He was my roommate at the time and one of my best friends. We joked around about it could be kind of like MacGyver meets Gilligan's Island. You take a couple of coconuts, transistor radio, a belt, some duct tape, a paper clip. With his brains, maybe a little bit of contribution from me, we could build a rocket ship and get out of it. It seemed pretty funny. When I think back to that kind of story, some of the fun, crazy things that we did in that really, really horrible apartment in a really dicey part of town, it's pretty funny. We once were confused for drug lords in that neighborhood, which isn't as funny when you think about, or as surprising if you think about the fact that, well, I'm brown, my girlfriend at the time was half Cuban, but Mike, he just started dating you, Melissa. Maybe they thought he was my accountant? The accountant hadn't come out yet, so that was, but we had a great time in that apartment. I'm also smiling a little because that MacGyver meets Gilligan's Island narrative had a little Ginger and Marianne thing going, but I won't go there. There were so many nuanced complexities about Mike. Such a great, humble, honest man. He was all class. Such a classy guy, must have had a classy nickname. Honest Mike, humble Mike, perhaps gentle Mike. He was Evil Clown Boy. EKB, because the K is for extra evil. And the funny thing for me, at least, is I didn't even know the origin of this story until very recently. Yet, like many in our group, I've known the moniker, and I've thought how perfect it was without even knowing its origin. I just figured it was because of that little evil twinkle in his eyes that he would have sometimes, or that mischievous grin. It also happens to be the name of his fantasy football team. Anyway, the real story about Evil Clown Boy comes courtesy of his EKB partner, Mark McCann, and offers another window into Mike's personality. During some massive game of Risk, we talked about his love of games, and that nerdy board game about wars and global domination where you have to build alliances and such. For the record, I've never played Risk. Mike went back on his word, broke a treaty, and basically revealed himself as a cutthroat and ruthless risk player. One of Mark's high school friends likened him to the clown from the old horror movie Poltergeist, and hence Evil Clown Boy was born. And along with Mark, they became the EKB Boys. Mark and Mike always shared a special bond within our group, from their joint evil risk-playing ways to their love of the Ohio State Buckeyes, and many other great road trips and stories that the two of them shared. You have to love that in the pretend world of the game of Risk, he was this mercenary and a backstabber, and a brilliant one at that. However, in real life, Mike used all of his superpowers, his many, many superpowers, only for good, and he was just the best person ever. Always for good, always the best. Could have been his motto. It should be all of ours. I was fortunate to have visited Mike and Melissa in Denver the week before he passed. As you know, he was physically struggling quite significantly by then, but his wit was as sharp as ever. As it shared with the guys that weekend, while we all hoped to see him at our draft just a few weekends away, it was also clear to me there was a decent chance that might be the last time I was seeing our dear friend. When I was leaving to return to New York, I went upstairs to say goodbye to him. We had a brief but meaningful exchange. Given his condition, our exchange was mostly me sharing my feelings with him, but he had a few really special responses as well. I'd like to share some of that conversation with all of you. He reminded me that at my 50th birthday party a few years ago, how we had joked around, though he had all only just played the front nine, and we still had the back nine to go. He of course managed to whisper out that he did still think that golf was a silly game, as he had said at the party, and as he had said many times before. And he said that we all have to play the back nine for him now. I showed him that Emerson quote in my wallet, and Emerson's definition of success. I told him how he had absolutely crushed that definition, my definition, or almost anyone else's definition of having succeeded. I told him how much he had affected my life and touched so many people. I told him that I hoped that when I'm eventually walking up the 18th fairway, or whatever my last hole may be, that I can hold my head up, having made a similar impact in my life that he had made in his, in just his 9 holes. I think that's a sentiment we can all share. I also reminded him about some very kind words he had said about me at my party those years ago. About not only how much those words meant coming from him, but how some very specific things he had once said to me over 30 years ago have been instrumental in helping me keep my focus on certain values throughout my adulthood. How many people in your life can you say have given you specific advice that is critical to your fundamental values? I wanted him to know that he had had that impact on me. As part of that conversation, I told him that one other thing that has been very dear to me for most of my life, and giving me peace, helping me stay grounded, and almost being my guiding light at times, has been the poem If by Rudyard Kipling, which I had been exposed to at an early age growing up in India. So without going into details, Mike's advice to me rang similar to one particular stanza in Kipling's poem, which I read to Mike. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters just the same. And Mike, without skipping a beat, realizing that even being near the end didn't justify the line of weird mushiness we were about to cross, goes right to that big brain of his and then proceeds to stump me with a trivia question about the poem. Again, just so Mike. And he made a crack that I should perhaps read this stanza at his funeral and ask everyone what he had just asked me. And that was the last thing we talked about before we had a long goodbye hug and said our I love yous. So I thought a lot about this. And he may have been joking in the moment, but I decided I'm going to do it and actually pose it to all of you. So this is the interactive part of my comments, so please pay attention. Here was Mike's little trivia question for me. And Rob, I'm particularly counting on you to know this. At which international sporting arena do the players see that Kipling quote, what a son of a gun, as they enter the field of play? And it's just those last 2 lines. You can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters just the same. Which international sporting arena do the players see that quote as they enter the field of play? Come on. Got a lot of people playing that game when I drove around here. Wimbledon.
Oh.
There you go. He got us all. Once again, so Mike. I've cherished that poem since I was a little boy. I've lived in London. I've been lucky enough to go to Wimbledon many times. Yet Mike dropped some trivia on me, even in that emotional moment, in the middle of all this mushy stuff that I was warbling on about. And what he said and did is what I love best about that memory. And it makes me smile when thinking about that otherwise sad goodbye. So I'm going to close with Mike's own words. Many years ago, soon after the movie Toy Story came out in the mid-90s, a couple of started throwing around the phrase, "to infinity and beyond," which, as you guys probably remember, was Buzz Lightyear's catchphrase. At various times we said it in silly contexts, like perhaps when going out on a big night. But as life has gone forward, and at times taken serious turns for all of us, we've used it more often in meaningful ways as well. Melissa, you might recall, I sent you a text to read to Mike after you had called me with him near the end. And I ended that note to him, intending to use that catchphrase, but instead of "to infinity and beyond," I incorrectly ended my text with "I love you to eternity and back." Melissa, do you remember what he asked you to send back to me? Just a simple picture, his own sweet reply, but with an implied gentle correction as well. It was a picture of two street signs intersecting, to infinity and beyond. So Mike, this time I'll say it right. You will always be in our hearts. I love you, my friend, and I will miss you to infinity and beyond.
Wow, thank you, Robbie. Really beautiful, beautiful tribute. Next up, we're going to invite Zegers' good friend Melissa Kohler to come forward. I understand from Melissa that they met you when Zoe was just in kindergarten, so it goes back a long time.
Yeah, if Mike had known that we were going to do his memorial on Halloween, he would absolutely have insisted on candy. So we've got buckets that we'll be passing around. I think I'm going to need to keep my glasses up here. Am I close enough? Okay. Yeah. Vertically challenged. Several years ago, Mike asked me to write a letter of recommendation for him. He was applying to the volunteer fire department. And I was, quite frankly, a little concerned about how a letter from me might reflect on Mike. For those of you who don't know me, I am not universally popular in Weston, especially if you're involved in local politics. So I started my letter like this, and I quote, "Not everyone in Weston likes me, but everyone likes Mike Zegers." And needless to say, he got the job. Mike was my best buddy and partner in crime. We walked together and gossiped together, got politically active together, went to camp weekends together, celebrated holidays together, played mahjong together, gardened together, bubbled together during COVID. Mike and I actually had a Zillow romance going. You know, we'd send each other Colorado home listings, and then SNL outed us. And it turns out even Mike Zegers had just a little bit of bougie. But Mike and Melissa and Tim and I even moved to Colorado together, and I had hoped that we would be neighbors forever. I learned the most about Mike when we were walking. He would share his hopes and dreams. hiking the Colorado Trail, moving out west, growing a pest-free orchard, winning fantasy football, having sausage pizza delivered to a house that pretty much skewed vegetarian and kosher, having grandchildren. But Mike wasn't just a dreamer. He was totally living in the present and one of the most positive people I've ever met. I would love to give you all of the things that Mike loved, but that list would be ridiculously long, so I will stick to my highlights. Most of all, Mike loved his family, and he loved his friends as if they were family. And from the number of friends and family who flew out to Colorado to be with him during his final months, it is clear that they loved him back. Mike loved gossip and games. He loved the outdoors, fishing, and his Adirondack chairs. He would have loved today and this awesome weather. Mike loved fire, fire pits, fireworks, and the fire department. He loved holidays and parties, food and cider, and donuts. Mike loved my matzo ball soup, and I have photographic evidence. And Mike must have loved me too, because I served him pineapple probably close to 100 times, and Mike never once let on that he hated pineapple. And I loved Mike. And here's how much. About 3 years ago, I hosted a century ride for my husband Tim's 60th birthday. That's 100 miles on a bicycle, and there were a lot of hills in this particular one. Now, Mike hadn't been diagnosed yet, but his leg was giving him a lot of pain. But not one to let a little pain get in his way. Mike joined that ride, and he made it about 85 miles. And then he bonked. We found him sitting on the side of the road, head in hands, dazed from dehydration, and his leg was cramping up something awful. And here's how much I loved Mike. I poured him into my beautiful, clean Porsche. I fed him shots of pickle juice and massaged his dirty, sweaty leg until he miraculously recovered and demanded that we go back to my house for the birthday party. But Mike had paid it forward. I've spent a fair amount of time in the hospital or confined to bed, and Mike was my most loyal visitor. And I will always be grateful that I could be there for him too. On that last wonderful day, I asked Mike what he was most grateful for. And I was hoping for some profound wisdom that I might be able to share with you today. But he just smiled mischievously and said, "What am I most grateful for? Seedless grapes." And I pushed him for actual words of wisdom. And Mike thought about it, and he said, "We've got to save the planet. So the next time you're thinking about a shower, ask yourself, do I smell like poop?" I will always be sorry that we couldn't be neighbors for the rest of my life, but for the 20 years that I knew him, my life was better because of Mike.
Thank you, Melissa, for those wonderful, wonderful words and memories. Tribute to Mike. At this time, we'll call upon Craig Cohen, who serves as the president of the Weston Fire Department.
Thank you, Rabbi. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Craig Cohen. I'm the president of the Weston Volunteer Fire Department. It's my privilege to speak here today to honor the memory of firefighter Mike Zegers. Mike joined our department on January 12, 2015. About a year and a half later, he joined Weston's Emergency Medical Services. During his probationary period and thereafter, Mike spent a lot of time hanging around the firehouse. I mean, a lot. At first, I didn't get it. But as I got to know him and watched his engagement within the department, I began to understand this was typical of the extraordinary person Mike was. Our department, like most volunteer organizations, functions largely as a meritocracy. What you've accomplished in the business world, the money you made, or the size of your home have little bearing. What counts is your commitment to the organization and the work you put in. Mike Zegers was committed. He became a fixture at the station house, absorbing as much as he could about this new world of firefighting and his chance to help others. He naturally excelled. It's not a wonder to hear the speakers who came before me to reflect on very same sentiments that he exemplified when he was with us in the department. The minimum requirements to become a firefighter or EMT can be daunting. Mike blew past that. In addition to his state certifications, Firefighter 1, Firefighter 2, he worked tirelessly around the station house. His call volume was regularly among the top responders. In recognition of those contributions, in 2017, Mike received the department's Firefighter of the Year award. This is the department's highest honor. It's awarded annually to the member who best exemplifies the work we do and the dedication to that work. Being named Firefighter of the Year is a very big deal in our organization. Reflecting back on this now, it becomes clear to me Mike approached the other facets of his life with the same curiosity, intensity, and passion he brought to our department. As such, it was no surprise to learn Mike graduated from Columbia University, earned a Master's of Business Administration from NYU, and had a successful business career. He went on to become the town's Democratic Registrar of Voters and was named Connecticut's Democrat of the Year in 2019. As best as I know, Mike started getting sick sometime in 2018. However, it wasn't until early 2019 that he applied for a formal medical leave of absence. Since you learn very little about a member's backstory before they join the department, I had no idea this was not Mike's first brush with cancer. Knowing what he likely was facing, and despite his surgeries and treatments, Mike sometimes appeared tired but never beaten. I saw him regularly at our gym in Station 2. He would ride that exercise bike daily and diligently, gaining strength back in an effort to return to active duty. He never complained and never appeared anything other than optimistic. While it's difficult to look back in time, knowing the pain and uncertainty he experienced, what I found so remarkable was Mike's courage, grace, and dignity in dealing with his illness. His nobility and positivity helped put others at ease that he was going to be okay, no matter the outcome. One of the greatest rewards of being a member of the Weston Volunteer Fire Department is the opportunity to meet and become friends with people I might never otherwise come to know. Time spent with members like Mike reinforces in me the unique and extraordinary talents of those drawn to Weston's emergency services. Mike's commitment, intelligence, decency, and dedication remain inspiring. I'm grateful for having gotten to know Mike. As a community, we're blessed he lived amongst us. In closing, I'd like to share with you a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King's book, Strength of Love, that resonates for me when I think about Mike. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in times of challenge and controversy. The true neighbor will risk his position, his prestige, and even his life for the welfare of others. In dangerous valleys and hazardous pathways, he will lift some bruised and beaten brother to a higher and more noble life. May God bless Mike, and may we all honor his memory. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Now, finally, we will turn to the Chief of Weston EMS, Mike Schlechter.
Thank you, Rabbi. We're always on call. So the Rabbi will forgive me a little bit of Hebrew, and the wind will cooperate. We're going to do our best on that. It's Matovu Aholecha Yaakov Miskenotecha Yisrael. How beautiful are your tents or your pavilions, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. When I got news of Mike's death, I was honestly struck quite dumb. It wasn't that I didn't think it was going to happen. I just felt such a profound loss for my friend. I wrote a Facebook post from Weston EMS where I said that even while our hearts were broken, we did not pause. It was the eve of Hurricane Henry, and there was work to be done to prepare for the storm, and I knew Mike would have understood, because of course, Mike was always the person to step up for any task, especially when it came to storm preparation or anything at the station. And when it came to writing this eulogy, I spoke to members of EMS and Fire, some friends in the DTC, and I wanted to figure out what to say and how to remember Mike. And everybody was so amazingly positive. And then someone said, but be careful, you don't want to be too sappy and too positive. No one is perfect. And I thought, you know, that's true. Mike is not perfect. He had a terrible fashion sense. Honestly. Who else would wear wide well brown corduroys and a blue sweater to a summer garden party? Mike Zegers would. He actually didn't care about the trappings and the things that occupy so many other people. He found fulfillment and joy in his family, in serving others, and even in his politics. He believed that doing good and doing right, even if it was a job that literally nobody else wanted, was important. For instance, at our monthly EMS general membership meetings, he would read us an SOG. He'd actually read an SOG out loud to everybody. And I promise I'm not going to do that, no matter how much Mike would have liked it. You have them ready, Melissa? Okay, we'll do that later, I promise. You know, in an era defined by political tribalism, Mike somehow managed to be both an adamant and full-throated Democrat, and also somehow be respectful, even-handed, even when he participated in debates on Facebook. What was probably his last ever ambulance call, he was on his medical leave and he was still working at town hall. We had a call come in, pardon me, I lost my wind, okay, we'll just go ahead. The call came in at the town hall for a person who was probably having a stroke. And it happened to be a person that Mike would regularly debate on Facebook on politics. And I got on scene, and Mike said, hey, look, it's Chief Schlechter. Look at that, you get the chief. Actually, let's see if this person's here. I think we're good. Okay. And the guy looked from Mike to me, and he said, you know that laughter is the best medicine, and the problem with you two liberals is you can't tell or take a joke. And Mike says, but I love jokes. Now, I was pretty focused on the neurological exam. I'm like, you know what day of the week it is? And Mike says, what do you call a group of dolphins? A pod. Great. What do you call a group of lions? A pride. I'm trying to get a blood pressure here. What do you call a group of zebras? And I looked at him, I was like, what do you call a group of zebras? And the patient was like, am I supposed to know that? And And Mike says, a dazzle. And then Mike says, hey, what do you call a group of Republicans? Unindicted co-conspirators. Right, everybody laughed, even the patient. And here's the thing. Mike had a way of exuding fairness and kindness, which caused others to act in a similar manner. And this really did happen. And it's interesting what we heard before, because then he looked at me and he said, hey, tell that joke at my retirement party. So I just did. Mike had a way of living, even when he was clearly so very sick. I actually like to think that Mike did not so much die of cancer, that he lived with cancer. He lived with it in the same fight and the full-throated devotion and passion and purpose that he did everything with. He was asking to go on calls when he was honestly more patient than provider. Nothing can stop his goodwill. Nothing can limit his commitment. Albert Einstein wrote, "Strange is our situation here on Earth. Each of us comes for a short visit, not knowing why, yet sometimes seeming to divine a purpose. From that standpoint of daily life, however, there is one thing we do know. The man is here for the sake of other men. Above all, for those whose smiles and well-being, our own happiness depends." So as we remember Mike Zegers on this beautiful Halloween day, know that in your hearts, if he were here with us today, he'd be wearing brown wide-well corduroys and a worn-out blue sweater. To Zoe, to Max, especially to Melissa, I had the honor to join you on so many Saturday night date nights, driving you around Weston. My deepest and most sincere condolences. And with that, I'd like to leave you with a Yiddish proverb that my grandfather used to say to me. Say, not in grief he is no more, but in thankfulness that he was. Thank
you. Thank you, Chief. And I like the opening Hebrew of Ma Tovu Alecha, lovely at your tents, your pavilion. I think that Mike also would have loved that he was kicked over to the side by a 6-year-old birthday party this morning. The story is told that one summer, a young college student afflicted with a muscular paralysis decided to go door to door selling books. He began by visiting the home of the college president. And the president's wife told him that they didn't need any books. And as he turned to leave, she saw that he was limping. She called out to him and said, "I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that you were disabled." And the young man, who hated pity, indicated that he was rather disturbed by her remark. And the woman then realized that she had probably said the wrong thing and hastened to add, "I didn't intend to imply anything but admiration, but tell me, doesn't being disabled color your life?" And the young man said, "Yes, but thank God I can choose the color." We know that life sometimes can be difficult and unfair. And as human beings, we are compelled to spend our mortal days in a world filled with tragic possibilities. We cannot always control most of the sorrowful events that may befall us in life, yet we can determine our attitude towards those happenings and reframe the way in which we view them. I think one of the lessons that we've learned from Mike is just that we can choose the color, and that we can approach life the way in which he did, even when faced with sorrow and with tragedy and with struggle. There's a rabbinic teaching from Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who asked his students, "Ezehi derech tova shidbak ba'adam," what's a good way to live one's life? And one of the students said, to have a ayin tova, to have a good eye. And another said, no, it's to have a chaver tov, to be a good friend. And the third said, no, to have a lev tov, to have a good heart. And Rabbi Yochanan said, I like the last answer. Rabbi Elazar is the best. Because those who have a lev tov, a good heart, possess all the other qualities. we all know that Mike had an ayin tova, a good eye, because he was able to look at life, the beauty of this world, and the planet, and all the people, and just to see goodness. He was a chaver tov, clearly a good neighbor, a good friend, a good community member. He was fun to be with, a great sense of humor, and had that just beautiful, humble sense about him. But above all else, and basic, I think, to everything that he stood for, he had a lev tov, a good heart. A warm, sincere, genuine, generous human being who put everyone's welfare above his own, who could be relied on and trusted, who was loyal, gave of himself, of his time, and to everyone and to every cause that he was passionate about in our community. So once again we say Zichrono Libracha, may Mike's memory forever be a source of blessing. In our faith we recite the words of the mourner's Kaddish, which speak not of death but speak of life, speak of a hope and a dream for peace in the future. And there's a beautiful mystical tradition that says that each time we recite these words, one's soul hurries his way to God in heaven. So we'll join with Mike's family now in these words of the mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah, bi'alma divra chirutei v'yamalich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, v'agalal v'zman kariv v'imaru amen. Yehi shemei Rabbah mevorach li'alam l'amel mayam. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei t'kudesha b'richu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechamata da'amiran bi'alma v'imaru amen. Yehi shlama Rabbah min shmaya l'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imaru amen. Oseh shalom v'broma hu ya'aseh shalom Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imaru amen. On behalf of Melissa and the entire family, I just want to thank you for being here, for your love and for your support today and always. In celebration of Mike, please have a donut or some coffee or some Halloween candy or whatever you might choose. Once again, may Mike's memory forever be a source of blessing to all of us, and thank you.